The last match that we have to talk about is the biggest match of the first round by far. It will get the most viewers, undoubtedly. There will be a lot of anticipation for this match in particular. It is OpTic Texas versus Atlanta FaZe. It is the final match on Thursday. It is the grand finale of Winners Round 1. They scheduled it at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. That is tentative, obviously, because the matches before it might take too long or might be very quick. We might get a DoorDash special throughout, and then it could start at like 6, right? It could start very, very early compared to the scheduled time, but it is scheduled to be the final match on Thursday. I think this is the I think if Miami or if Vancouver performs up to their potential and Miami does, that could be the most interesting matchup. But going into it, Atlanta versus OpTic probably is the most interesting matchup because we've seen more recently what OpTic can do. They finished top 4 at their at Major 4. It's their first time finishing top 4 this season after winning champs a year ago. It was also the first event that Mercules competed in with OpTic after joining during the Major 4 qualifiers. Atlanta FaZe, they went to 3 grand finals this season. They won 2 of them. They lose to LA Thieves in the grand finals of Major 4. They, if you want to go back and listen to it, our Legacy Check podcast, we talked extensively about most of these players on Atlanta FaZe because Simp and Abizi have 2 championships. Another champs ring puts them in that very elite class of 3 world championship rings, and it definitely brings them into the GOAT conversation. If Simp is probably kind of, in my opinion, approaching that anyway, but certainly with accolades, winning 3 championships would do a lot for their legacy. Same for Celium. Draza would also get 2. It would be a very momentous occasion for Atlanta FaZe, and it would shut up people, at least for a little bit, with the Silver Surfer stuff. As for OpTic, they are attempting to become the first team ever to win back-to-back championships, even with different roster. No brand has won the championship in consecutive years. OpTic could be the first in 2024 and 2025. Mercules, I mean, if he wins a championship in his third event ever, or third CDL event ever, and his second event with OpTic, he's only been on the team for like 7 weeks total. I think that would be an incredible story. OpTic in general, Shotzi would also be elevated into GOAT conversation, considering he would also have 3 championships. We talked about Dashy, how much his legacy could use it, and Hook probably has the most interesting legacy talk of them all if he wins another championship. What are you thinking about going into this matchup, considering we did see this match pretty recently, and Atlanta has been rather dominant? Even if some of the matches have been close, they have not lost to OpTic in a pretty long time.
Yeah, I think this is definitely, anybody who's listened to our episodes over the last couple of weeks while we've been filling the gap in the break and whatnot. I know I said it at least once. I feel like I probably said it a couple times. Despite this being a 2-7 matchup, and despite like the numbers suggesting FaZe have had OpTic's number this year, et cetera, like this is a really interesting matchup on paper. Just, not even solely because it's brand power with OpTic and FaZe, right? Like it's just we've seen other occasions where it's kind of ironic what I'm about to say because at least when we were talking about the old OpTic rosters in previous years and stuff, the one narrative around them was sometimes they came out slow to start tournaments, and that kind of put their backs against the wall early on, and then the team was just so good it didn't matter. But other times it did end up mattering, and that's when they had some of their lackluster, quote unquote, lackluster performances in comparison to all their great accolades and whatnot. But that's sort of just, it's weird to say it, but for FaZe, like the lingering thought for them just has to be like we can't have a repeat performance of last year's champs where things just did not go according to plan. And, I said it last episode too, like, um, the FaZe roster, because of that champs performance last year, it felt like, at least from the outside looking in, there could have been more roster change talk if they hadn't won the Esports World Cup following champs last year. Um, so you know, a, a 2-7 matchup in terms of seeding. This is one where you have like the 2-7s in March Madness, where maybe like the 2 seed is not the super name brand, and then like the 7 seed, your Duke, your UNC or something like that, and it's like, you're filling out your bracket, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna go with the 7 here. um Not that I didn't mean that in the sense that I don't think FaZe are good, but I just feel like, for a 2-7 matchup, that this is got to be a little more interesting than, I guess, let's just say like LAT, the 1-8, where even though Boston have beaten LAT this year, like, it feels like LAT should be able to take care of business against Boston. And I do think, end of the day too, I think Atlanta should win this series. They have beaten OpTic uh, 4 times this year, and they have beaten OpTic with Mercules in the roster. It's only been once, but it's not like the Vancouver Miami situation where they had those 2 rosters haven't played. So yeah, this is an exciting matchup, and we've talked historically over the years for some of like the qualifiers and stuff about how the last match of a day in the qualifiers should always be the banger, and sometimes they like throw like these non-interesting matches at the end of the day to just wrap things up. But no, this is a case here where most people are going to want to stay tuned in and watch this matchup. This is one you got circled on the calendar. If you got time to only watch one match on Thursday, like, this is the one you're probably going to want to watch. And it very well could be a situation where FaZe just come out and 3-0 sweep. But I think even in a situation where FaZe does 3-0 sweep, like, I feel like all the maps are going to be competitive. They maybe the search isn't the closest, just because I still think FaZe are a really good search team, and obviously for a newer roster like OpTic, they might not have had as much time to put into that mode in particular. But yeah, even in a world where this is a 3-0 for Atlanta, I could see it being like 250, 200 in the hard point, a 6-4, 6-5 in the search, and then a 3-2 in the control. 3-2 in the controls, not really anything to scoff at though, because I bet like 80% of controls go to round 5. But yeah, I'm really excited for this one. I think it's really it sets the tone for both teams, right? Like, Atlanta comes out, gets a win, like, people already start to forget about last year, and they're just like, okay, like, it's like a check mark, like, yeah, okay, they're on to winners round 2, like, maybe Atlanta, we get another taste of Atlanta versus LAT. That'd be cool. And if OpTic pull off this upset in round 1, people are starting to talk about what you're saying. Like, okay, are they really going to get this done? Like, back to back, Mercules first championship at champs. Like, Dashy gets a 2nd ring, Shotzi getting a 3rd ring, Hook getting a 2nd ring. Like, so lot of stuff to look at with this one. I am really excited about it, but I do think in the end FaZe should get the job done.
I don't think it's going to happen, but something you said earlier about Boston versus LAT is like, or something you said something similar, and I thought about this. It's kind of like a trap game in college football where these big powerhouses, they, Georgia schedules Jacksonville State or something one week, and they just expect it to kind of be a tune-up before they play Florida or Alabama the next weekend. And sometimes that comes back to bite them. And the team that you weren't expecting to be competitive is much, much more competitive than you could have imagined. And sometimes those teams lose those games. I think LAT losing to Boston in Major 2 is something similar, because I believe they were going to play like Vancouver in round 2 or something like that. Or that was kind of projected, but they had like what we thought was going to be a really interesting 2nd round matchup. And of course it doesn't come to fruition because they lose in round 1. I think there's a chance that happens in LAT versus Boston this time around. I think it's a pretty small chance. And there's also a chance that happens here with Atlanta and OpTic. The dynamic is different, right? Because there is such a big gap between LAT at their best and Boston at their best. There is a gap between Atlanta at their best and OpTic at their best, or what we've seen to be their best so far with Mercules. But I still think like that's a much closer gap, or a much smaller gap than LAT and Boston. So if Atlanta kind of takes this for granted, and I'm not saying they will, but if they took it for granted and said, we have their number, we don't lose to these guys anymore. Like we didn't lose to them for a long time. And then there was like a year, 2 year stretch where we just lost to them all the time. And then it's been 2 years basically where we just
The
been beating the hell
CEO.
out of them. Yeah. It's been a Draza show basically. Like Draza has this ridiculous record against OpTic, and I just looked it up while you were talking. So their Atlanta FaZe's record now over the last 2 years, so the 2024 season and this 2025 season, and that's including EWC. Atlanta is 11-1 against OpTic over those 2 years. So Draza had this pretty good record against OpTic when he was LAT. That is continued with Atlanta FaZe, and to win 11 of 12 matches against anybody, but particularly a team that won champs last year, has probably this year is probably not the greatest indication, but they just beat them not too long ago in the qualifiers, or not the qualifiers, at Major 4. So we've seen it recently, we've seen it throughout the season, we saw it last year even when OpTic was in general a much better team, and Atlanta still won. That makes me think that there is a possibility, there is some kind of alternate universe where Atlanta FaZe does take for granted this match and start thinking more about this overall goal of, we're going to go and win champs. We're going to get to the grand finals. We're probably going to play LAT, and we're going to avenge that Major 4 loss, and we're going to, get either our second or our third rings respectively. I just don't think it's going to happen, but I think it's at least something to bring up. Atlanta has won 5 straight matches against Atlanta FaZe. Like you said, they're 4-0 against OpTic this year, dating back to, I believe, EWC. They beat them. Even technically, it was not Atlanta FaZe and OpTic Texas. It was like FaZe Clan versus OpTic Gaming, but we know what the deal is there. At the same point, like it is pretty interesting to think about that. OpTic has just not been able to beat this team at all over the last 2 years. But maybe that changes here, because we saw OpTic go into champs last year, and we thought, that they were very talented, but that they were in disarray, that they wouldn't be able to bounce back and kind of find the success that they did. And then they end up winning champs, and it kind of erases all that doubt. It kind of makes all of the doubt look really silly in retrospect. So I'm going to go with Atlanta. I think our stances are pretty clear on the top 2 teams this year, and it's very hard to pick against either one of them unless they're playing each other. And OpTic, as much as I do think they could be a real kind of spoiler in this event, because they are the 7th seed. If you're just looking at how they played during the regular season, you would probably not get any indication that they're a very good team, or like at least a good enough team to compete for a championship. But I do believe that the talent on that team is pretty immense, and they probably could win the championship if things click into place at champs.